Previously on TomTalks.
Other times, she's usually paired up with someone like Caitlin or Donald and Douglas. Oh, I've got plenty to say about them next time.
TomTalks. After another 2 months, we are back. Hello all, and welcome to the 9th installment of TomTalks, the program where we talk about everything to do with Blue Bastard. Though, as with the previous installment, we're not talking about Blue Bastard today. So let's see who we are talking about. Take it away, Sheffield. A common thing in writing for any sort of media, be it TV shows or movies or what have you, is when new writers are brought along and they don't quite understand what they're writing for, and will often retcon pre-existing material and ruin certain aspects. One of those aspects is definitely the characters. But then, ironically, there are instances where the writers do understand what they're writing for, but still get things like the characters wrong. The latter was exactly the case for two of Thomas's biggest fan favourite characters. The true Scotsmen themselves, Donald and Douglas. That's right, in today's episode of TomTalks, we'll be looking at how these two icons were absolutely ruined in perhaps the most unlikely era to do so. How much were they butchered? Let's find out. So before we get to the bad stuff, let's cover some good stuff first, because I think we need to understand who these characters are personality-wise before we get into how butchered they were. Since their debut, Donald and Douglas have always been shown to be loyal, hard-working, and courageous brothers who look out for one another. For instance, when the spiteful brake van gets Douglas framed for being late, Donald stands up for him and confronts the van. Another thing to know about Donald and Douglas is that in many of their major appearances, they're not always together. Sometimes Donald will appear on his own, and sometimes Douglas will appear on his own. They're also involved in two of Season 3's best episodes, Donald having his fun, playful rivalry with Duck, and Douglas being involved in the famous Escape. Donald and Douglas really had it good during this era. But of course, these good aspects didn't last long. The first signs of Donald and Douglas's eventual decline were in Season 6. Their personalities, while sort of consistent with their previous portrayals, were destroyed. To begin, we have the infamous Twin Trouble, where we have Donald and Douglas bickering and moaning at each other for the entire runtime. I'm sorry, but this plot just cannot work with Donald and Douglas. You know, the twins that are loyal to each other and never get pissed off over running into a fucking hay cart. And then, in Percy and the Goddamn Haunted Mine, it's Donald and Douglas who tease Percy about those stupid gnomes. Why are they tricking Percy? That's Bill and Ben's job! Luckily, this flanderized version of the characters didn't last long, and Series 7, for the most part, course corrected them. Following that, Donald and Douglas's appearances slowed down. They only appeared a couple of times throughout the later model series, which was definitely for the best. But then we come to when they return in CGI. Now, Donald and Douglas didn't appear in CGI at first, which is hardly surprising given the direction the show was going at this point. When Andrew Breder and team turned up, they heavily focused on bringing back old familiar faces that were strangely absent for many years. Year by year, more forgotten characters came back, including in the 2015 special, Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, the triumphant return of Donald and Douglas. Hooray! Where they contributed very little to the overall story. Their only real purpose was giving the terminally online Thomas fans of the 2010s something to get hyped over. Something very common to the Arc era was, when characters were butchered horribly in the Nitrogen era, they got fixed. But for some reason, the returning characters, with some exceptions, got the opposite effect. Duck just could not shut up about the Great Western in this era, when he only brought it up every now and then previously. Oliver regressed back into a big-headed, full of himself douche. And of course, Donald and Douglas. Remember when they were butchered in Twin Trouble, but then got better in Series 7? Well, that twin trouble fluke has now reared its ugly head once again and become their only defining character trait. They're bickery, disagreeable children, basically. Of course, when this episode came out, nobody cared about this glaring inconsistency with their characters because it's Donald and Douglas, damn it! And then we get to Emily in the middle, because 2 episodes that got Donald and Douglas wrong just weren't enough. This episode dials up their fighting to a major 150. Not only do they fight over the dumbest shit imaginable, but they're also foolish enough to stop their train on junction points and a steep ass hill. These are not Donald and Douglas. This was the very last episode these two ever starred in, and the very last one they appeared in. After a tiny cameo on BWBA, they were gone again. Honestly, I'm kinda glad. Not only because they were fortunately spared the BWBA insanity, but also because if this is how they were gonna be moving forward, I'm glad they were axed. Though it's kinda sad that this is what caused them to fizzle out. Not a single episode where these two were loyal to each other like the early years, or where one appears without the other. Thanks a lot, 2003 Writer's Bible. So there we go. That's how Donald and Douglas started out strong, went bad, got better, and then became so much worse. What do you lot make of Donald and Douglas being butchered? And who do you think is the most butchered character in the show? Be sure to let me know in the comments. Now, this is where we would go over to Engineer Pixel Toby to see his views on the topic, but I feel like that gag is getting old now and it's high time I retired it. Hear that, Pixel? We're ditching your gimmick.